My name is IMP Bae, and I'll be presenting the external factors of human perception. So perception, Chris Ack defines perception as what the body is able to interpret, and also that in order for an object to be interpretable, it must be able to be understood by the mind through the interplay of any of the five senses. Now, doctors and scientists have for a long time believed that the brain is hardwired and fixed even by the time of adulthood. They say that the brain is just fixed and it doesn't change much throughout life. However, recent neuroscience advancements, and even the last decade, say that this is actually false. They say that the brain actually changes throughout our lives and is adaptable to its surroundings. This is the basic understanding of neuroplasticity. Now, just think of your brain as a dynamic network of billions of pathways that light up every time you feel, do, or act a certain way. The more you practice these pathways and the more that you become familiar with these routines, these pathways will actually become more strengthened. So take this person for example. This person might have a negative lifestyle. They might exhibit a lot of stress and anxiety. They might have bad nutritional habits, bad smoking habits, and make wrong lifestyle choices. Now, whenever this person does this, the brain will become more familiar with these pathways, and the brain will actually strengthen these synaptic connections because it's familiar and it's constantly doing these routines. Now, say this person tries to do something a little bit different. This person tries to start meditating more instead of stressing, starts eating better nutritional diets, and restrains themselves from these bad habits while also pursuing more beneficial habits like studying. The brain will start connecting, reconnecting, and reforming its synaptic connections, and these new connections will actually be more efficient and more beneficial than the newer ones, or than the previous ones. Now, this is the basic understanding of neuroplasticity. With this understanding of neuroplasticity, we can see that the brain is actually malleable and it's possible to change. Knowing that it's able to change, we can see that there's a lot of influences and external factors that might affect perception. So what exactly are these factors? Knowing what they are will allow us to better understand human physiology, psychology, biology, and more. So knowing this, to what extent do external factors such as psychology, environment, and culture influence human perception? I intend to prove this using the stimulus materials given by the College Board and also other evidences. The first one is Richard Axel's Sense and Sensibility, which attributes mostly to the psychological perspective, while Gershon Dublan and Joseph A. Paradiso's extrasensory perception has more to do with the environmental perspective. Now, although there are differing perspectives, they both contribute to the fundamental cause of understanding a foundational analysis of what perception really is. So firstly, the psychological perspective. We can see that emotions, tendencies, and experiences are all psychological connections within the brain that affect physical interpretation of reality. Now, a lot of people don't really associate psychology with reality because they think that they're completely separate things, but psychological studies actually show that this might be false. Firstly, I use the Richard Axel Sense and Sensibility material that states that the personal interpretation of the external world can be created through these emotions, tendencies, and experiences. So your history and your culture that you live in might actually alter your own individualized and personalized perception of the world. Chaz Firestone and Brian J. Skoll, who are Yale psychologists, believe that anytime an experiment shifts perceptual reports, it is possible that this shift reflects a change in judgment rather than perception. However, neuroskeptic, which is a pseudonym given to a UK neuroscientist for the PLOS neuro community, says that a heavy backpack may make a hill look steeper. Now, this is a psychological thing, but this can actually be more practical. We can see that sadness and anger correspondingly could make things seem darker, not just metaphorically, but literally. We can see that a psychological interpretation of things can actually affect our physical interpretation of them. This brings us to our environmental perspective. The field dependence is a term given to the degree to which the environment affects perception. Field dependence is categorized into two separate things: desirability and familiarity. Deborah Cohen, who is a neuroscientist, partnered with RAND Corporation, which stands for Research and Development, to create a study of obese people. They placed these obese test subjects in environments that had easy food accessibility and also a lot of food advertisements. They found that this environment artificially triggered and stimulated a sense of hunger that wasn't there before. Now we can see that the environment affects our perception as well as our perception affecting how we interact with the environment. This is shown in Gershon Dublan's statement when he says that environmental perception will ultimately force us to redefine the basic understanding of presence. The next is the cultural perspective. Inferiority, discrimination, and racism are only three of the things that that are outcomes and ramifications of cultural biases. We can see that the beliefs and values are manifested through the use of an analysis of the cultural perspective. We can examine the Greek and Chinese cultures, where the Greek had a much more personalized agency and individualized culture, while the Chinese had a much more harmonic and united and universal type of culture. This was manifested in their everyday work lives and their work ethics and just how their individual livelihood was. There's certain qualifications and limitations to my research, however. The first is the nature versus nurture argument. Nature says that perception is a genetic inheritance and that it's based on heredity. However, nurture is more based on the environment and how the factors around you affect how your perception is. Now, my argument definitely supports the nurture argument. However, the psychological perspective does indeed consider the nature argument. In addition, at this point, one cannot fully understand how how people perceive an object or idea yet. Now, although I might not be able to know what you're seeing, it doesn't disqualify that I know that what we're seeing is distinctly unique and individualized to us. Now, in conclusion, perception of reality is a subjective and individualized matter, and it can actually be formed by past experiences, atmospherical surroundings, and cultural biases that overall shape how we perceive things. Thank you.
Okay. Sean, how did you select the strategies you used to gather information or conduct your research, and were they effective?
So firstly, I try to maintain a rather scholarly and academic approach to this because my research topic is very abstract and it's not something that you can use statistics and numbers with. So I had to definitely use a pragmatic approach and try to find real life applications of how perceptions of the world can affect how we perceive things, like for example the environmental perspective, where I showed that how obese people interact differently with the environment. So instead of using statistical evidences in that type of aspect, I tried to stay with more real life applications.
Thank you. And the second question, what additional questions emerged from your research and why are these important?
So firstly, I wanted to know more about how having a basic understanding of how perception affects the world and how the world affects perception would have in the more pragmatic applications to us. So I wanted to dive more in on how understanding the external factors on perception can be used to further scientific research or even used to further a basic or even more fundamental knowledge of ourselves and how we interact with the world.
Thank you.